Number. Give me your badge number and the name of your watch
Sir,
commander.
I need you to step aside, now.
I have not been given a lawful basis to comply. Badge number, now.
Gate 5, non-compliant blackmail, requesting backup. I have a 1001 in progress.
I am a United States federal judge. You will state your name and badge number.
There are cases that are filed and dismissed. This one rewrote department policy, dismantled a command structure, and produced a verdict that became the largest civil rights judgment rendered against a transit authority police department in the history of the Midwest. What happened inside Chicago Union Station on this Thursday morning began as a routine journey. A federal judge traveling to Washington for an emergency session of the Seventh Circuit Judicial Council. It ended with that judge face down on a concourse floor in handcuffs while a transit officer stood over him and a body camera the officer had reported as destroyed captured every second of it. The recording survived. The cover-up did not. If you believe that racial profiling has to stop, then like this video and subscribe right now to support our campaign to make our societies safe for all. Drop your location in the comments. This story is reaching every corner of the world, and I want to know where you are watching from. Here is exactly what happened. Stay with me. Chicago Union Station moves fast on a Thursday morning. 7:08. The main concourse was operating at full capacity. Commuters in winter overcoats cutting toward platforms. Business travelers pulling roller bags across the marble floor. Amtrak staff moving in uniformed clusters between the gates. The Great Hall carried the particular energy of a transit hub that never fully stops. Overhead announcements cycled through departures. Ticket barriers opened and closed in steady rhythm. A man joined the priority boarding corridor near Gate F, 45 years old, dark charcoal overcoat, black leather document case, the measured stride of someone who had spent 2 decades moving through federal buildings without breaking pace. His federal judicial identification and Seventh Circuit travel credentials were already out, held forward, visible, ready. He had been traveling this route for years. He knew the drill. An officer positioned near the corridor entrance was already watching him. The officer stepped forward before the man reached the gate and told him the priority corridor was for pre-cleared passengers only. He said general boarding was at the far end of the concourse. He said it loudly. The man stopped. He extended his credentials and stated clearly that he was a United States Federal District Judge of the Northern District of Illinois, traveling on official judicial business under a Seventh Circuit Judicial Council travel authorization. The officer took the identification. He examined it for 2 seconds. He handed it back without running the verification scanner, without confirming the federal court seal, without comparing the photograph to the man standing in front of him. He told him to step to the side for additional screening. Behind him, a white man in a business suit walked through the corridor without being asked for anything. A white woman with a rolling suitcase was waved forward. 2 white men in overcoats passed through in conversation without breaking stride. None of them were stopped. None of them were looked at twice. His name was Judge Joseph Moore, born on the south side of Chicago, the second of 3 children raised by a city bus driver and a public school librarian. He was the first in his family to attend university, the first to pass the bar, and the first to be appointed to the federal bench. He graduated near the top of his class from the University of Chicago Law School, spent 4 years as a public defender in Cook County, and 7 years as a civil rights attorney litigating police misconduct and systemic discrimination cases across the Northern District of Illinois. He had held departments to account in federal court. He had secured consent decrees. He had put officers on the stand and extracted testimony that dismantled institutional cover-up narratives built over years. He was appointed to the federal bench 14 years ago. In the years since, he had presided over civil rights cases that reset the accountability standards for law enforcement agencies in 3 states. issued rulings that restructured disciplinary review boards and sentenced officers convicted of civil rights violations. He had twice received commendations from the Administrative Office of the United States Courts for his role in advancing judicial oversight of law enforcement misconduct. That morning, he was traveling to Washington for an emergency session of the Seventh Circuit Judicial Council, convened to address a pending federal emergency order affecting multiple district courts across the region. His document case contained his federal judicial identification, his Seventh Circuit travel authorization, a letter of courtesies issued by the United States Marshals Service, and case briefing materials he had been reviewing since 5 in the morning. He had made this trip from Chicago more than 40 times. He had never once been questioned at the gate. Officer David Jones, 31, had been with the Chicago Union Station Transit Authority Police for 6 years. His personnel file contained 14 formal complaints. 11 of those complaints came from Black or Latino passengers, racial profiling at priority boarding areas, unlawful detention, verbal intimidation, and physical force applied to compliant individuals. Not one complaint had reached a disciplinary panel. Not one had resulted in suspension or retraining. His direct supervisor, Lieutenant Robert Battle, 53, had processed every dismissal. Insufficient grounds, inconsistent accounts, no independent corroboration. Jones had been given a commendation in his 4th year for exemplary performance in transit corridor management. He preferred the priority boarding corridors. He had told fellow officers they attracted travelers who believed their credentials settled every question, and that certain people needed to understand that access was conditional. A Black federal public defender named Laura Thompson had been detained in the priority boarding area for 90 minutes during transit to a client hearing in 2021. A Black Cook County Circuit Court judge named Carol Lopez had been redirected from priority boarding 6 times across 3 years and filed 6 complaints, each dismissed before a case number was assigned. A Black retired United States Marshal named Joseph Luna had been told at this same gate that his federal retiree credentials required additional documentation before he could proceed. Every complaint dismissed, every time. By the time David Jones stepped into Joseph Moore's path that Thursday morning, he had been operating this way for 6 years without a single sustained consequence. Moore was not a situation that had developed. He was a selection made before he reached the gate. Jones radioed for backup and described Moore as a non-compliant passenger creating a disturbance. Moore had not raised his voice, had not moved without instruction, had not made any physical gesture that could be read as threatening. He had asked in clear and measured language for Jones's badge number and the name of his on-duty watch commander, information any member of the public was legally entitled to request. Jones grabbed him by the collar, not a directional touch, a grip, both hands closing on the lapels of his overcoat and pulling him sideways with force that spun him off balance. His document case hit the marble floor and the clasp buckled. The Judicial Council travel authorization, the Marshals Service letter of courtesies, the emergency session briefing materials scattered across the concourse in a wide spread. Commuters nearby stopped walking. Phones came up. A station worker near the departure board took 2 steps forward and then stopped. Jones drove him toward the low steel railing beside the gate entrance and shoved him forward. Moore's shoulder struck the metal edge hard. He called out. His reading glasses flew from his face and skidded across the floor. Jones forced both arms behind his back, put his knee into the back of Moore's right leg, and drove him down to the concourse floor, face forward, onto the marble, in the main hall of Chicago Union Station, in front of hundreds of commuters. He had not resisted. He had not raised a hand. He had not done anything from the moment Jones first stepped into his path that justified a single second of what was happening to him. Jones put his knee into the back of Moore's neck and reached for his cuffs. He said at full volume into a concourse with hundreds of witnesses and 8 security cameras running that people like him always had to make everything into a confrontation. Moore's cheek was against the marble floor. His voice was controlled. He told Jones he was a sitting federal judge, that this was assault under color of law, that every second of it was being recorded. Jones told him to keep talking. He locked the handcuffs. 8 security cameras captured everything. Not one of them missed a frame. What David Jones did not know, what would cost him the years that followed, was that his own body camera had been recording since 6:39 that morning. The first call reached Transit Authority Police Chief Leroy Goetz at 7:22. The second came 70 seconds later. The third was from the office of a Chicago alderman who had already been sent the clip by a commuter who filmed the entire sequence from 35 feet away. Goetz was 58 years old, 23 years in transit law enforcement, the kind of institutional fixture who had endured 4 mayoral administrations by knowing which problems required visibility and which required containment. He arrived at Gate F 13 minutes after the handcuffs went on. He pulled Station Concourse Supervisor Susan Stafford aside before he reached the scene and asked her what she had. She told him more was on the floor. She told him what the man did for a living. What crossed Goetz's face in the 2 seconds that followed was not concern. It was the specific calculation of a man who had just understood that the officer under his command had assaulted a sitting federal judge whose professional work involved holding institutions exactly like his accountable for exactly this kind of conduct. He walked to Jones and told him quietly to remove the cuffs. Jones pushed back. Non-compliant, witnesses would confirm. Goetz said Moore's name, his court, and his federal title in a voice low enough that only Jones could hear it. The cuffs came off. When Moore was helped to his feet, left shoulder dropped, the side of his face marked where it had contacted the marble, overcoat torn at the left lapel, Goetz moved close and dropped his voice. He mentioned the station's private security office. He mentioned a department physician. He began describing an internal review process that could be initiated before any external notification was made. Moore looked at him. He had spent 7 years as a civil rights attorney building cases against institutions that opened with that sentence. He had spent 14 years on the federal bench, presiding over cases that ended with that sentence on the losing side. He told Goetz he recognized every element of what was being attempted. He looked up at the camera above the gate. Then he looked back at Goetz and told him the review process had already started and it was not going to be internal. A man had pushed through the crowd while Jones's knee was still on Moore's neck. Garrett Hubbard, 64, was a retired federal magistrate judge who had served 26 years in the Northern District of Illinois. He had presided over matters before Moore's court on 2 separate occasions. He recognized him from across the concourse the moment Jones grabbed his collar. He identified himself by name and former judicial title, raised his phone, and placed a 911 call in real time. Assault in progress, transit police officer, sitting federal district judge, Chicago Union Station, main concourse, Gate F, emergency medical response required, federal notification warranted. When Goetz turned to the cluster of commuters recording near the barrier and told them the transit authority would need those devices as evidentiary material, Hubbard told him without pausing that warrantless seizure of bystander recordings constituted a violation of federal law and that he would litigate that point personally if Goetz proceeded. Goetz did not collect the devices. Moore declined the paramedics' offer of transport. He sat on a station bench near the gate. A transit medical officer examined his shoulder. He made 2 calls. The first was to the chief judge of the Northern District of Illinois. The second was to the FBI's Chicago field office directly. The Chicago FBI field office logged the notification at 7:39. 3 special agents arrived at Union Station within 19 minutes. They secured the scene, documented all recording devices in the vicinity, and placed the Administrative Office of the United States Courts and the DOJ Civil Rights Division on notice before 8:15. By 8:45, the footage was on every major news network in the country. The FBI subpoenaed the station's full security archive before 10. 8 cameras, complete synchronized coverage, clean audio, every second documented. Jones's incident report filed at 10:12 stated that the subject had been verbally combative, refused repeated lawful directions, assumed a physically aggressive posture, and posed an active threat to station security. 8 cameras contradicted every clause. Before smartphones existed, before cloud servers stored footage automatically, before 8 cameras were running in that concourse, do you think anyone in that department would have told the truth about what happened? Drop yes or no in the comments, and if this story should be heard by more people, share it. Most people still don't know how far this went. Jones had submitted a body camera damage report the morning of the incident. He stated his camera had sustained impact damage during a prior shift and had been non-functional since 6:44, 3 minutes before his approach of Moore. The report referenced a hardware fault code and had been countersigned by Lieutenant Battle the same afternoon. FBI forensic technicians accessed the Transit Authority's cloud backup infrastructure 37 hours after the assault. The camera had not been damaged. It had been recording without interruption from 6:39 that morning. The footage showed Jones at the Gate F priority corridor entrance at 6:56, watching the boarding area. He spotted Moore approaching from the far end of the concourse, a man moving calmly, document case in hand, credentials already visible. Jones turned to the officer beside him, Officer Timothy Clark, 26, and said with a visible expression of anticipation that he had one coming who was going to be a problem. He told Clark he would handle it. He had not reacted to anything Moore did. He had identified him from a distance, decided on his approach, and moved to the gate entrance before Moore had covered half the distance between them. The damage report contained hardware fault data that had been fabricated. The device logs showed continuous operation. The report had been filed with falsified technical information to eliminate the recording as evidence. Every prior complaint, every detained public defender, every redirected judge, every dismissed filing across 6 years was no longer a scattered record of individual poor judgment. It was a coherent operational history, insulated from accountability at every level above the officer who carried it out. The DOJ Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation into the Chicago Union Station Transit Authority Police 9 days after the assault. What investigators found extended well beyond one officer. Recovered internal communications revealed an organized scheme maintained by 6 officers, Jones among them, referred to in group text messages as the screen. The objective: identify minority travelers in priority boarding corridors and move them to general boarding through whatever means necessary. The officer with the highest weekly count collected cash from the group. Lieutenant Robert Battle had not merely covered for the scheme, he had structured it. Recovered messages showed him setting weekly targets, tracking individual counts, and noting in one message that Jones had been the top performer for 4 consecutive months and that his numbers were setting a standard. The 14 prior complaints against Jones were re-examined. Investigators contacted every complainant. 12 responded, 10 agreed to go on record. Laura Thompson, the black federal public defender, detained for 90 minutes during transit to a client hearing. Carol Lopez, the black Cook County Circuit Court judge redirected from priority boarding 6 times over 3 years, who had filed 6 complaints, none of which were ever assigned a case number. Joseph Luna, the black retired United States Marshal, told his federal retiree credentials were unverifiable without additional documentation. Over 10 years, 847 complaints had been filed against Chicago Union Station Transit Authority police officers. 86% involved black or Latino passengers. Not one had resulted in a sustained finding against any officer. The number was not a coincidence. It was the output of a system designed to produce it. The federal grand jury convened 7 weeks after the assault. David Jones was charged with assault under color of law, under 18 United States Code Section 242, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, filing false federal reports, obstruction of justice, and evidence fabrication for the falsified body camera damage report. Lieutenant Robert Battle was indicted as co-conspirator. Conspiracy to deprive civil rights, obstruction of justice, and failure to prevent a federal civil rights violation. He had not passively allowed the screen scheme to operate. He had built it, managed its participants, and ensured every complaint was routed to dismissal before it could be investigated. Chief Leroy Gertz was charged separately with obstruction of justice and attempted witness intimidation. His conduct at the scene, the private office offer, the attempt to collect bystander devices, the instruction to Stafford not to speak with federal agents until she had consulted department legal counsel, had been captured by 2 cameras. His attorney argued ambiguity. The cameras did not support ambiguity. Officer Timothy Clark was granted immunity in exchange for full cooperation. He described the screen scheme in complete detail: the text message group, the weekly counts, the cash transfer records across 14 months, the emails from battle, and the forensic testimony confirming the body camera damage report contained fabricated hardware fault data that did not match the device's actual operational log. He had not made a poor decision under pressure. He had identified his target, planned his approach, executed the assault, and spent the remainder of that Thursday constructing documentation designed to make the recording disappear. The federal trial of David Jones ran for 3 weeks. The courtroom was at capacity every day. Civil rights attorneys, constitutional law scholars, journalists from outlets across the country. 10 prior complainants, including Carol Lopez and Joseph Luna, sat in the gallery the morning closing arguments were delivered. The defense argued Jones had responded to a legitimate threat assessment in a high-traffic transit environment. His attorney described the body camera footage as incomplete context and the screen messages as informal workplace communication taken out of context by federal investigators. The prosecution played the body camera footage without comment. The corridor entrance, Jones at the gate, his scan of the approaching crowd, the moment he identifies Moore from the far end of the hall, still more than 100 feet away, moving calmly, credentials in hand, the turn to Clark, the expression, the words. No one in the courtroom spoke. Jones took the stand. He said the footage lacked the context that would explain his assessment. He said he had no specific recollection of the exchange with Clark. He argued the 14 complaints represented coordinated retaliation by passengers who objected to legitimate enforcement procedures. The prosecution presented the screen text messages, the weekly count tallies, the cash transfer records across 14 months, the emails from battle, and the forensic testimony confirming the body camera damage report contained fabricated hardware fault data that did not match the device's actual operational log. He had not made a poor decision under pressure. He had identified his target, planned his approach, executed the assault, and spent the remainder of that Thursday constructing documentation designed to make the recording disappear. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. The verdict was unanimous on every count. Jones was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and received a lifetime prohibition from law enforcement employment in any jurisdiction. Battle received 5 years. Getz received 3 years and forfeited his full pension. Ramos, Motes, and Fox received sentences ranging from 18 months to 3 years. 6 months after sentencing, Joseph Moore filed a federal civil rights lawsuit naming Jones, Battle, Getz, the City of Chicago, and the Chicago Union Station Transit Authority. The city's legal team moved to settle within 6 weeks. Their initial offer was $6.5 million with a confidentiality clause. Moore declined. His response carried conditions and no dollar figure: a formal public admission of wrongdoing, complete dissolution and reconstruction of the Transit Authority police force, an independent civilian oversight board with investigative authority, subpoena power, and zero departmental review capacity, mandatory bias and civil rights training for every officer in the reconstruction, a federal consent decree with 10 years of DOJ monitoring with quarterly reporting requirements. 16 additional complainants filed civil suits. Their combined settlements reached $11,700,000. The Chicago Union Station Transit Authority Police Department was disbanded. The reconstruction brought new external leadership, revised hiring standards, mandatory body camera protocols with tamper-evident cloud archiving inaccessible to department personnel, and independent external review of every use of force complaint. The Civilian Oversight Board was constituted with full investigative authority, subpoena power, and a charter explicitly prohibiting departmental interference in any active review. A federal consent decree established 10 years of DOJ monitoring with quarterly reporting requirements. 16 additional complainants filed civil suits. Their combined settlements reached $11,700,000. 2 years into his sentence at a federal correctional facility in Terre Haute, Indiana, David Jones gave a recorded interview. He said he had done what his training prepared him to do. He said Moore had escalated a routine interaction into a confrontation. He said the outcome would have been different if the subject had cooperated from the start. Joseph Moore was asked to respond. He said he had cooperated from the first word to the last word before Jones's hands closed on his collar. Credentials extended before being asked. Hands visible throughout. Voice level throughout. Every direction followed while being assaulted on the floor of a public train station in the city where he grew up. He said the cooperation argument was never about his behavior. It was about Jones's premise that a black man standing in a priority corridor needed to earn his right to stand there in a way that no one else in that corridor was ever asked to demonstrate. He did not need to prove he belonged there. The cameras confirmed it. The jury confirmed it. The record confirmed it. He said the only thing left unresolved was the belief that had made that possible, and that no verdict, however large, could fully resolve that on its own. 8 months after the assault, Joseph Moore walked through Chicago Union Station for the first time since that Thursday. His shoulder had healed. The torn overcoat had been replaced. He carried the same document case, the same measured stride. His credentials were visible in his hand as he crossed the Great Hall, not because the new officers would question him, but because he had decided that he would move through public spaces in this country with his identification where it could be seen, not as an accommodation, as a record. The new transit officers nodded as he passed the gate. A young black woman in a new uniform, part of the first cohort hired under the reconstructed department, stepped forward and stopped him for a moment. She did not say much. 2 words. Moore looked at her. He nodded once. He walked through the priority corridor and was not stopped. If you believe qualified professionals deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of race, share this story. If you have ever been made to feel like a target by people who were meant to protect you, drop your experience in the comments. And if you think no one should be subjected to the humiliating experience of racism, subscribe right now, because we are bringing you more stories where justice costs exactly what it should: everything.